Welcome to The Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. Today, I want to talk about what it looks like to establish an effective stewardship ministry. How do we make stewardship a fruitful aspect of the ministry that we're leading in your local church? You know, one of the things that we talk to churches about all the time is this concept of stewardship and how we have muddied the waters as the Big C Church, because we are talking about things that actually aren't in and of themselves stewardship. And so what we need to start with in order to really establish an effective stewardship ministry is the awareness that stewardship is part of Christian discipleship. This is not a conversation about the blocking and tackling of budgeting. It's not a conversation just about generosity and giving. Stewardship as a ministry needs to be thought of as an invitation into walking closer with Jesus. Stewardship is actually a way that we experience connection with Jesus, intimacy with him. We see him differently when we are faithful stewards. And so this is actually a much bigger vision cast than what I think most of the time the local church is stepping into. Stewardship as a conversation should involve all of the resources that God has placed under our care. It should be a conversation around how we're spending our time, how we're using our labor, our skills, our talents, how we're investing our relationships, how we're actually connecting with what he has given us, not just what's in our checking account, not just what credit card debt we have or don't have. Those are conversations that really, I think, end up shrinking the stewardship discussion into something that is much more about the practical steps than it is about the spiritual character of a faithful steward. I think stewardship needs to be a conversation that the entire congregation is stepping into, ideally simultaneously. In order for there to be a richness and a fullness in this dialogue around stewardship, we need to invite everyone in to a shared language, to a similar vision, to just a framework that allows all of us to play. This is not just a conversation where we carve out the people who are in trouble and we say, hey, you go to our stewardship ministry. That's actually not what we're doing, if that's where we're sending them. What we're doing is we're sending them to a financial crisis ministry more often than not. Or maybe we carve out and we say to the people who are wealthy, you go to our stewardship conversation, which is really a building campaign or some other fundraising vehicle. And we have confused the congregation by using that term, stewardship, for things that actually aren't really the fullness of stewardship. In order for a stewardship ministry to be effective, it needs to be an all play. It needs to be something that everyone is talking about, everyone is engaging in, and we're asking questions that go way beyond spending habits. We're asking questions that are really rooted in the ownership of all of these things. Who actually owns the breath in your lungs? Who actually owns that skill, that talent that you think you developed entirely on your own, that you think you have the rights to, the rewards for using that skill and talent because it's yours? Where do you think it came from? These are much bigger conversations, and they open us up, I think, to a sweetness, to a level of intimacy and a gratitude that isn't available when we think we own it. We don't have anybody to thank if we own it. If it's ours, if we did it all, if we created it, we built it, the only person we can thank is ourselves. And that just leads to a really self-centered view of the world. And so I think the mistake that we've made as a Big C church is actually shrinking and condensing this conversation into something that's really more about the blocking and tackling, the basic fundamentals. And that's the reason why a lot of people check out of it. A lot of people in the community say, yeah, I don't need to learn about budgeting. I got plenty of money. I'm fine. They don't think it applies to them. Or a lot of people who might be in trouble if your stewardship conversation is about a building campaign or a fundraising vehicle. They're like, well, I don't have any money to give, so I'm out. And we give everyone reasons, unintentionally, we give them reasons to check out, to remove themselves from a conversation that I think can be so life-giving if we invite them all in. That's why we're so passionate at Good Sense about this conversation being an all play, getting everybody in on a shared language and a framework that works for all of the members of your community. If your community has built this stewardship ministry around fundraising, if your stewardship pastor, your stewardship organization is rooted mostly in getting more giving, right? Encouraging people to be more generous. This is a really hard ship to turn, but it is absolutely worth turning. I think one thing that might be valuable is just to own the confusion. Recognize that we have been using this word really incorrectly. We've been talking about stewardship, but really what we're talking about is tithing, it's donations, it's capital campaigns. And that is a very thin aspect of a much bigger topic. And so if you have been in that place where you've kind of pushed this stewardship conversation in a direction where it's mostly around giving, it's a great opportunity to start to own that and reframe it. Why would you engage as an entire community around this conversation? Well, one reason is because we've actually had the wrong conversation for a while. And we want to change the way we think about this. We want to move everybody into a better understanding of the fullness of stewardship. It's a great way to start that dialogue with your community. The same is true if you've basically been thinking of stewardship as benevolence, as helping people in crisis. If mostly your stewardship ministry is helping people budget and get out of trouble, you've made the same mistake. It's just with a different part of your community. That's all. And so again, owning that this has been a confusing conversation, just tell everybody, hey, I realize this conversation about stewardship has left this division in our community. It's left people thinking either this doesn't apply to them because they don't have any money to give to the capital campaign, or this doesn't apply to them because they're not in trouble. And the truth is it applies to all of us. We all need to be faithful stewards with the resources that are not ours. And none of them are ours, right? So we need to step more into that conversation and the fullness of the community engaging in it. And I think owning that we've done it in a confusing way is a great step towards fixing that problem. I recognize that we as a community, as a society, we don't like to talk about money. We're embarrassed easily when it comes to money. We recognize that when we get into conversations around money, our true nature, our true priorities are going to show up. We're going to have to face the fact that we are spending in categories and ways that we really know are reckless or irresponsible, but we don't want to have to deal with it. And if we don't talk about it, then we don't have to deal with it. We can just continue to act like we have it all together and continue to actually put ourselves in danger. I don't think this is an optional conversation. I recognize that it's an uncomfortable one. I recognize that as a church body, we tend to want to avoid this because it is really messy. But I think the fact that we tend to avoid it is what allows some of these destructive behaviors, these tendencies that are towards self-indulgence, or these tendencies that are towards hoarding and overaccumulating. Those things continue to fester because we're not bringing those things to the light. We need to open up our community to this conversation. And that may feel scary, but what I want to argue is that it's deeply rewarding. It actually is what brings about change, because this is a discipleship issue. So, how do we do it? What are some of the ways that we actually start to move in this direction? Well, one of the most important things is we need to take seriously the task of training your staff, training your leaders, giving them a way to understand this, because that becomes self-reinforcing. I don't think it's wise to have a stewardship ministry that's completely compartmentalized and that most of your staff has no connection with, no understanding of. They just know this thing is over there, but they don't engage in it. It's really hard for that conversation to permeate your community if your staff, by and large, is not having that conversation. And so the starting point in my mind is get leadership trained. Get them to understand these concepts, get them really well versed in how to explain them, how to teach them, how to discuss them, so that when they are in conversation with someone in your community and they recognize a need, they know how to explain why they need to have a deeper understanding of stewardship. They can call out, oh, I used to think that way too, or yeah, I see that a lot in the hearts of the people we're in community with, and I understand why it's there, but here's the key that unlocks it. These are the ways we need to change our thought around it, and inviting them in to a conversation that is happening throughout the congregation, throughout the leadership and the staff, rather than being over here in a corner and I'm not really familiar with what they do, but it sounds like maybe you have a stewardship issue, so maybe go talk to the stewardship pastor. I can't really help you. That shuts down any momentum that might be available to that family that's needing to grow in this area. And so step one is get your whole team to be thinking similarly and understanding the discipleship issue that stewardship is, to recognize this issue of ownership versus stewardship so that they can talk it. It will spread like wildfire if your leadership is engaged in that conversation frequently enough that it becomes familiar and confident. When those opportunities come up, they're shrinking back. But if they really understand this and they feel competent in it, they actually can press in. We need to marry up, I think, the needs of those who are in trouble and the needs of those who aren't, and recognize that many of the issues that they're facing are the same. Many of the challenges that they're dealing with are the same. They're just at different magnitudes. They have different resources. They have different skill sets. But at the end of the day, we're all fighting against the same tendency to want to own and take credit for and decide and have authority over all of our resources. And so the person who's in trouble has been doing that, but they don't have the money to do that. And so now they're in credit card debt. And the person who's not in trouble, by and large, is doing that, and they have the money to do that. So they look like they're healthy. They look like they're fine, but they both have the same tendencies. They both have the same problem. And so we need to give coaching and development and see both of those community members as having overlap, needing similar conversations to happen, because that's what allows those people to actually be in conversation with each other. When we separate and we see these as totally different circumstances, we can create the unintended consequence of division and isolation. And so if we have a consistent coaching language, no matter what circumstance you find yourself in, building your stewardship ministry on some of these consistent foundational thoughts allows that conversation to be consistent enough that in the settings that these individuals may find themselves in where they overlap, they're still having the same conversation. They're still thinking the same way. We're unifying and we're bringing community rather than separating and bringing isolation. I think incorporating this idea of stewardship into several different ministries, that this becomes kind of a flag that you plant in all of these different conversations. So things like premarital counseling, right? These basic financial stewardship conversations and the idea of being a steward in all of our resources, physical, our time, our talents. When we build that into the conversation of premarital counseling, we're establishing new families that are walking out faithful stewardship. Marriage ministries. So if you are doing crisis ministry for marriages who are in trouble, many of their issues, as far as they can tell, are money related. They're not necessarily money related, but money is where all that tension and that conflict is most readily felt. And so we need to build that in to that marriage crisis conversation, because a lot of times they will identify that as the source of the crisis. Men's and women's ministries. Are we talking about faithful stewardship in the context of the men's groups, in the context of the women's groups? Are we engaging in that conversation as individuals so that when they come back together as couples, they're talking the same language, they're sharing in the same concepts? If only one of those spouses is exposed to that conversation, they're still fighting an uphill battle when they come back together. Small group ministries. Anything that you are doing that is bringing people together is a great place for the stewardship conversation to take place. We want to build this into the natural rhythm of all of these different aspects, rather than, again, segmenting it and carving it off and sending it over into the corner. This is such a core piece to Christian discipleship, and we need to recognize how important that is so that it permeates all these different ministries and it becomes an aspect of all of the conversations we're having, rather than only one piece that happens really irregularly and with very confusing, inconsistent language. That is how you build a more holistic and more effective stewardship ministry. We love helping churches figure that out. We love connecting with organizations that are trying to build this in to their communities. It is a hard hill to climb, but it is incredibly worth the effort. And we are more than happy to link arms with you and help with that climb. We can't wait to help your community have these kinds of conversations more and more regularly and more confidently. If we can help you in any way, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can connect with us at our website at goodsensemovement.org. You can book a time with us, and we would love to hear more about what you've tried so far and how we might be able to help you engage in a more holistic conversation around faithful stewardship. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.